I think President Trump is struggling with his administration trying to protect America from voices inside the U.S. and outside. And I think given the United States' vulnerability in cyberspace, I think the government's bending over backwards to make America safe. But they're going too far. We are going to have a direct impact on American customers of Huawei, and we spent $11 billion last year buying from American companies. And if we are forced to go our way, we'll be okay. But in the long term, I don't know that Huawei will come back, and I think America will be hurt.
I mean, you've said it could cost $30 billion for Huawei if we ultimately see this ban enforced. Is that right?
Well, we are projecting up to a $30 billion reduction in our projected revenue growth if we're not allowed to buy from American companies, which, as I said, we're not sure if the impact's going to be that great, but we know the impact on American jobs is going to be very significant, and it's going to affect the whole global ecosystem.
So we're talking about two things. We're talking about hardware that Huawei produces, phones, laptops, for example, or 5G networks. Because what we're seeing in Congress is them saying, actually, if we allow Huawei to be involved in the United States development of 5G networks, they could ultimately be paralyzed by a bad actor, China acting through your company.
Well, the people speaking out either don't know or refuse to understand the way the telecommunication networks work. You look at the UK. The 4 UK operators have said that despite some issues with our software that we're going to improve, they feel very comfortable using Huawei products because the telecom operators help make the various countries safe.
But the UK separated it into core and non-core, and they're now pushing the next Prime Minister to make a decision on this. The United States is saying there is no difference between core and non-core as far as Huawei is concerned. You are vulnerable to demands, orders of passing over information, of spying from the Chinese government. Can you resist that? As a Chinese company, can you resist that?
Oh, absolutely.
How?
Because we'll use the example. If we don't have data, we can't be forced to turn it over. And the fact is, there are mechanisms you can put in place that can guarantee that whatever data we touch will be perfectly auditable and visible, so we're not able to access the data without it being known. And secondly, and this is a potential risk with all the equipment of all the vendors, there are mechanisms to test the products to look for backdoors, and that's what the principal deputy to the Director of National Intelligence said. She said, I can test for that.
Huawei once had big ambitions to grow its presence in the United States. The United States makes up a tiny fraction of Huawei's business, but the world's largest telecom provider and second largest smartphone seller wanted to have a much bigger presence in the country. It saw the U.S. market as a growth opportunity for its smartphone business, and wanted to sell IT equipment to companies. A key part of that effort had been Futurewei, the company's U.S. research and development outpost. Huawei, known for investing heavily in R&D, poured millions into Futurewei over nearly 2 decades. The research centers allowed Huawei to tap the country's many resources for tech innovation at a time when it not only looked to grow in the United States, but also as it rapidly expanded around the world and prepared to be a leader in the push for 5G. But the company's ambitions in the United States, in particular for Futurewei, have been stunted by a White House pressure campaign that's now gone on nearly a year. The restrictions hit Huawei's U.S. business on multiple fronts, barring it from buying from key American suppliers and threatening its telecom equipment sales in rural American markets. They've also made it illegal for Futurewei to transfer technology to Huawei locations outside the United States. As a result, Futurewei has laid off staff, closed offices, and is losing valuable partnerships with American universities, all of which could jeopardize its position as a leading technology innovator. Although its investments in the United States are a relatively small portion of its total research and development budget, they reflect the importance of having a presence in the country where tech talent, venture capital and academic research, as well as other leading companies, are clustered. Although some executives have suggested the company could leave the country altogether, Huawei risks being hurt if it's blocked entirely from development in the United States. You can't count up innovations that didn't occur, so we won't be able to know for a while what the consequences are for Huawei of disengagement from the United States, said Scott Kennedy, the senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's like oxygen. You're never really sure how significant it is until you don't have it. For its part, Huawei has insisted it will be fine if it's forced to leave the United States. But that's not the route it wants to take. Huawei wants to meet with U.S. government officials to work toward a solution, but it's been challenging to find people that will speak with us, the company said in a statement to CNN. In the early 2000s, Huawei undertook a broad globalization strategy in an effort to shift its image from a Chinese telecom provider to the global mobile services powerhouse it is today. It was in this spirit that Huawei established its U.S. operations in Plano, Texas, in 2001 and began to build out research and development centers across the country. In 2011, Huawei marked its 10-year anniversary in America by opening a 200,000 square foot Futurewei R&D headquarters in Santa Clara, California. The company said at the time the facility included state-of-the-art research labs and would focus on developing next-generation communications solutions for U.S. customers while supporting Huawei's global R&D research efforts. But business got more difficult for Huawei in the United States the following year, after the U.S. House Intelligence Committee released a report claiming the company poses national security and consumer privacy risks. Huawei has long denied that it poses any threat. The White House acted on those fears in May when it added Huawei and 69 of its affiliate businesses to an export blacklist, restricting American companies from selling to it without a license. The Commerce Department last week extended a temporary exemption to that rule, but clarified the exemption is mostly limited to allowing sales of parts for existing products, not new ones. It also added 45 more Huawei affiliates to the blacklist. The blacklist has obvious repercussions for Huawei, blocking it from buying parts from important U.S. suppliers, such as Google and Intel. But it also created a problem for Futurewei. It meant U.S. Futurewei locations could no longer transfer intellectual property or trade secrets to Huawei's Chinese headquarters or other blacklisted affiliates around the world, the company said. Now, research and development done at Futurewei can't actually be implemented into new Huawei products. Last month, Huawei laid off around 600 U.S. Futurewei employees, about half of the company's total U.S. workforce, and closed several office locations as a result. At least 200 of those layoffs were from the flagship Santa Clara research facility, according to the warn notice filed with the state.
This operating system has been in development for the last 2 years, Julia, but it's really become a lot more important recently because of this trade war. I'll get into that in a second, but just to talk about the operating system for a second here, it's not going to show up on Huawei smartphones right away. They say they're going to do that over the next 3 to 5 years. Really, you're going to start seeing it more on what they're calling their smart screens, which will debut later this year. You might see it on smart watches that Huawei makes and even in vehicle systems. So this operating system is going to be rolled out slowly over time, it looks like, but this all comes back to this trade war, because remember, it was back in May that the Trump administration placed Huawei on an entity list, which basically forbade U.S. companies from selling their technology to Huawei. Huawei needs key U.S. technology to operate, including Google's Android operating system, which is what Huawei's smartphones run on. Basically now, Huawei can only use the open source or the public version of Android and can't use the Google apps like Google Mail, like Google Maps. And so that was a big deal for Huawei. So this operating system is basically a hedge, Julia, against Huawei needing U.S. products in order to make its own products competitive.
And there's so much, or so little clarity around what the relationship's going to be going forward, particularly with companies that supply Huawei. But what we heard yesterday from the White House was, as far as federal contracts are concerned, they're going to tighten the grip here.
Yeah, and not only that, but Bloomberg has been reporting this week that the White House was considering at one point, which we had knew was public knowledge, that they were going to loosen some of those restrictions on private U.S. companies like Google providing technology to Huawei. Well, Bloomberg is reporting that the White House is going to delay restarting some of those relationships, and so Huawei is this puts a big question mark over Huawei's future. And I think this just goes to show you that there's no short-term deal in place for Huawei, no immediate relief as this trade war drags on with no end in sight, Julia. Companies that are caught in the middle, not only Huawei, but companies like Apple or Intel, these are all examples of private companies that are going to continue to get hurt from this trade war.
Hold me. What's left? The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the highways, and on we'll go. Along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest, echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
Remaining Futurewei employees will focus on completing projects that were already underway prior to the restrictions, said Tim Banks, HUAWEI'S President of Partnerships and Risk Management. For now, the intellectual property for those projects will remain in the United States as the company hopes for a compromise with the White House. But the likelihood of such a compromise happening anytime soon looks slim, Kennedy said. Perhaps they're hoping for a change of administrations, a change of priorities, Kennedy said. But I think there is a consensus that Huawei is a problem and that concern is going to outlive Trump. That could mean Huawei's continued investments in U.S. research and development end up going nowhere. Depending what those projects are, that could be a real loss for the company. Banks didn't specify the nature of the ongoing projects. But in the past, Futurewei workers have developed technologies related to core areas of Huawei's business, such as a method for machine learning on wireless networks and one for encrypted data transfers on 5G networks, according to filings with the U.S. Patent Office. And Banks said it's unclear whether Huawei will invest in new U.S. research projects going forward. Huawei invested $500 million in Futurewei in 2018 and had planned to invest $600 million in 2019 before it was placed on the blacklist. This makes it difficult to do that research and development that will go into future products, Banks said. Adding to that difficulty, many American research universities heeded U.S. government warnings and halted partnerships with Huawei in recent months. Huawei had over 50 research partnerships with American universities last year. From 2014 to 2018, the company paid more than $10 million in gifts and contracts to U.S. universities, according to data from the Department of Education. But recently, MIT, Stanford, Princeton, University of California, San Diego and others have all cut research and funding ties with the company over the national security concerns and its placement on the export blacklist. Stanford said in a statement that it placed a moratorium on partnerships with or gifts from Huawei out of an abundance of caution and are aware of nothing inappropriate arising from past support that Huawei has provided to Stanford. Huawei had been a member of two research programs at the university, one focused on artificial intelligence and another on solving complex engineering challenges. The opportunity to form partnerships such as these are part of the reason foreign companies create U.S. research and development outposts. We have a huge, dynamic community of researchers and funders and universities and opportunities to test-drive different technologies, Kennedy said. That's why the U.S. is one of the world's leading innovators. Foreign companies investing in development also has residual benefits for the United States, experts say. If we have the best talent in the United States and the most innovative companies, that keeps us on the forefront of tech development so we know where things are going. It has a multitude of benefits, said Martin Krasimpa, the research fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Development. Huawei, however, says hurdles in the United States aren't slowing its development efforts elsewhere. Banks said the company still has research partnerships with more than 300 universities globally and that Huawei has begun research on 6G, the next generation of wireless network technology, in Canada, in partnership with several institutions. As a global leader in telecom, we have to be looking at the future regardless of the current political climate, Banks said.